Hey everybody, this is Ruby Rose Fox from Muscle Music. I am here with Michael Westgate from Michael Westgate Therapy, yes?
That's correct. Yes.
And I'm so excited to have a conversation with you, mostly because you're a polyvagal lover and have integrated it into your practice. You have the coolest charts I've ever seen
Thank you.
around polyvagal theory. So my audience base are artists and performers, and so they have totally different needs. But I love the way that you educate in polyvagal theory and talk about your own experiences. And I just felt so much resonance between us that I just wanted to talk and see what happened. I have so many thoughts about polyvagal theory. So I'm going to try not to be too nerdy with you and actually like help our audiences get what they need.
Yeah, it's going to be
So,
hard because one thing that I've noticed is that very few people that say they know polyvagal actually know it. That's my
yeah.
experience. And I don't mean to be critical, and I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but I started to look at your videos and I was really impressed. I'm like, well, you really
Thank you.
understand this. And I think why you like my charts,
Yeah. Yeah.
because you understand what I did. And it took me a tremendous amount of time to create those.
Yeah, I mean, they're so cool.
Thank you.
And having a visual for how the nervous system evolved is so important to understanding, especially of those of us who are visual. But
Yes.
first of all, I have to ask you, um, the before I ask you what neuromuscular therapy is, I want to talk to you about what is the one thing that people get wrong about polyvagal theory, or many things that people get wrong about polyvagal
It's
theory
an
that just
excellent
frustrates
question.
you.
Yeah, thank you for that. So the main mistake that people make is they try to learn polyvagal without realizing that polyvagal totally changes the framework of how we see the nervous system. So if you try to learn polyvagal with your foot solidly in the old model, you're going to misinterpret it constantly. And that's what happens all the time. So, polyvagal turns the whole thing on its head. So in the past, what we thought was that our mind controls the body primarily. And what polyvagal teaches us is that's only true a fraction of the time. And usually it doesn't do it at all. It's the subconscious nervous system that controls our thoughts, feelings, and motivations. And if you don't understand the structure of polyvagal, you won't understand that your subconscious response to your environment is what decides how you are. You
Yes.
don't decide how you are. That is a mistake. Now, sometimes you can, and with training, yes, but as a baseline, no.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We This is the huge error, and it's Descartes. There's actually a book called Descartes' Error,
Oh
which
yeah.
right,
Came
which
out
is
like a
talking
decade
of
ago.
yeah, and it's a
Yeah.
great, really great book because what he explains is that Descartes made a massive error when he decided that arbitrarily, by the way, that the mind controls everything. And therefore, if you want to make the world better and yourself, all you have to do is control your thoughts. And it's absolutely false. That is, now I'm not saying that it doesn't help sometimes and that there isn't a value there, but it's a fundamental error. And it's one
And
of the things, right?
I just
Go
wanted
ahead.
to add something is that I don't think it is arbitrary. I think it's the suppression of the feminine. It's the body, which is,
Yes.
first was disgusting and not noble. So that idea that it
What's the
comes from the body
primitive?
is
They saw the body as the primitive part of us, right? And the
right.
brain's the civilized part of us. And that's to separate the two is ridiculous. And there are books out there that I've read in the last couple of years, like The Master and His Emissary, which is a book by Ian McGilchrist.
Yes.
And he completely lays this out. And he's a research psychologist. And basically, what he says is that the Western, not even just the Western world, but the modern world is full of people that act as if their right side of their brain is damaged and doesn't work. And it's because there's been so much emphasis on the left brain and what it does that it's so overemphasized that now it's dysfunctional. Now it's people are so left brain that they're not balanced. And according to McGilchrist, the way that the brain's supposed to work is the intuitive right brain, which kind of senses everything, right, is supposed to be the master. And the left brain is the servant that does the tasks for you because it's precise and detailed and tracks things, right? And then once the left brain does a task for you, it's supposed to come back and double check with the right brain so that you can have an intuitive, balanced, sort of directive way of living. And when you cut off that right brain and you just live from the left, what happens is that people become very narcissistic and sure about their right, even if they know they aren't. Like, they ignore any facts that don't agree with what they want to be true. And therefore, you have this arbitrary sort of modeling of the world that doesn't take into account the systems that is most important for reviewing what we think we know, which is the right brain. And, it's a huge mistake too. People think that logic is only from the right brain. That is absolutely false, because logic is a mix of those two systems checking with each other back and forth. But the right brain should be the master. So what you're saying is very accurate. There's this sort of stomping on anything that doesn't meet this certain model of rigid kind of, deductive, chopping things into little pieces and then thinking that's the only thing we need to measure. I mean, it's ridiculous, and it's very damaging to people's health, because, now we say, oh, we don't need sports and we don't need art. We just need the important things to study, which is going to be like math and so on. And math's great, but even higher math requires a ton of right brain function. So there's this
100%,
right? Because it's creative.
The greatest mathematicians say that they're not using the same parts of their brain. They learn, there is a left brain part of the process, but later when you're doing much more advanced math, they say it's a creative process.
That's right.
Which I don't understand because I never got that far, but yeah.
Neither, but I've read about it too. And, Einstein, he spent most of his time when he came up with the theory of relativity, daydreaming.
Yeah.
So he was imagining what would happen if he was a photon traveling from the sun to the earth, and what would he do? What would he feel? And what would the other elements around him of physics, how would they affect him as a electron or photon, whatever it is? And it's like, yeah, that's not linear thinking. That's highly creative thinking.
I mean, it's for me as a dyslexic person living with a person with ADD. I think about it. I think about them as advantages now, because I really think about my brain as, yes, it's not as good with syntax and certain things, but the way that I can write songs and understand polyvagal theory in my own way, that is highly intelligent and highly creative. And they're just different kinds of intelligences. But in the realm of what you were saying, of the old way of thinking, that top down, meaning that the brain, the logic is dominant, it doesn't value other kinds of intelligence.
Right. And like part of what you just said, so by the way, I'm dyslexic as well.
Oh, good.
Which explains one reason why we probably understand the way we approach this.
Totally.
So we both have the dyslexic advantage.
Yeah.
Which is a real thing. I don't know if there's a book called that.
I did. I read it, and I felt so great about my life.
Me too. I was like, oh, yes. I've been avoiding my dyslexia for years, shaming myself for it. And now I realize that it's actually an advantage, which it is.
Yeah.
But so the point that you're making, which is critical here, is that the right brain is your feeling brain, emotions, right? And the emotions are what tell you what state you're in, as well as body awareness. So state awareness is, and when we're talking about right brain function, one of the things it does is helps us connect with the feelings in our body.
Yeah.
And the feelings in our body are what let us know where we are in our neurological states. So people that are cut off from their body don't know where they are in their neurological states. Even if they wanted to, they maybe intellectually figure it out, but they can't feel the sensation patterns that form with each emotion.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing that it's somewhat controversial, but I am a firm believer in the science that supports the fact that every emotion has a specific body pattern of sensation for every person.
Oh,
Right.
absolutely.
So,
Absolutely. I'm like, how is that not just true?
right. I
Just
mean, well,
from,
those of us, but you wouldn't know that if you were out of touch with your body, but you're an artist, a
well,
performer,
also, my
right?
training is acting. So every
There you
actor
go.
knows. Um, I think it was the James Lang theory of emotion is that tiny bits of muscle tension add up in the brain to an emotion. So,
Yeah.
like, when I have my cheeks, these muscles activated, my brain goes, "Oh, I think Ruby's happy."
That's right. When you're like, even if you're faking it,
Yeah,
the
even
system
if you're
actually
faking it,
like,
because any actor knows that if you're if you're playing Lady Macbeth who's stressed all the time, or you're playing a deformed character, it's going to change the way you feel. You don't,
yes.
method acting is not necessary because it happens to actors naturally because of the muscle tension in their body. So I couldn't believe that theory more.
Yes. It's an article that talks about a study done in Finland where they tracked this. They matched people's reports of body sensation to emotional experiences and found it to be
Wow.
consistent across culture and gender. So,
And are
if
there
you're,
similarities, or does everyone have kind of unique patterns, or
they didn't find any unique patterns. So, I mean, what's
wow.
unique, I think, is the response to specific stimulus. So, in other words, if you're going to get nervous when you're in an elevator, that's not what everyone will do. But
Right.
but when everyone gets nervous, they feel it the same way. I mean, a certain kind of nervous, like
But
in
the
other words,
specific
fear.
muscles that are activated and triggered are similar.
That's right. And it's also, I believe there's fascia that activates too. Because I think that the encoding of memories, at least the somatic ones,
Yeah.
is not the brain as much as it is the nerves and the fascia, I think, store memory. So that's my opinion from my professional point of view.
Wow. That really blows my mind, but also makes complete sense.
So that it's a mistake to think that all the memories are stored in the cranium. That's not that's the details, like the names and the structure, right? But the feeling, because the
Yeah.
thing that's really interesting is that if you think about memories, there's different kinds. There's factual memory, but what about emotional memory? If you think about, okay, I'm going to go back to when I was a kid and I saw my granddad and I felt a certain way. Well, what does that mean? It means that you had sensations in your body,
Mm-hmm.
right? You didn't like think it. Like you saw your granddad and you felt, depending on what your relationship is, but in my case, it was positive, kind of a safe, warm, settled feeling,
Right.
right? And what does that feel like? Well, it means that my system is not tense, right? I feel like I can just go, like this, instead
Mm-hmm.
of, maybe your granddad's a bastard and you go to see him and you're like, once
Totally.
is he going to hit someone again, or will he get mad and start drinking? So it
Yeah.
just depends. That's the map. That's what I call your sensory map of the
I,
world, your state map.
I've seen this physically. So there's work in the acting world by this woman named Kristen Linklater, and it's
Hmm.
all about dispelling muscle tension so that actors can be free with their voice. It's called freeing the natural voice. So basically, the idea is if you don't have too much muscle tension, then your voice will be free. But it's not trauma informed because what it doesn't take account for is that the second you start asking people to release their muscles, trauma comes out.
That's there
And
for a reason, right?
and I remember teachers, people would be reciting a Shakespeare monologue and someone would have tension in their shoulders. And then they would say, hey, Joe, can you put your shoulders down? And they would go, okay. And then one shoulder would go down and they'd be like, okay, can you put your other one down? And they'd
They're
be
like,
like, okay. And it would literally be like there was a force, a protective force in the body that would not let go. And then finally, if they were willing to physically let go, a huge emotion would come up. Either they would get really defensive with the teacher, or they'd just cry. And I remember, like, I didn't know what was happening back then. I was just like, something is happening. Like, this is crazy to watch. And it just proves everything I've seen in acting training proves what you just said.
And that's a great observation on your part. And that's actually one of your superpowers as a dyslexic, is observational powers. That's where we excel, way above the normal person.
Yeah.
Is that we're especially aware of present realities.
Huh.
We're very, I don't know if you knew that, but
I didn't know
dyslexics
that.
are
Like,
exponentially, what's that?
Like
in any
being
given
in the
moment. Yeah. So one of the things that the dyslexics do that set us apart from everyone else is that we are unbelievably observant. And that's one reason why we excel in the real world and not in the classroom often.
Yeah.
We're also naturally logical, which is one of the things that book said as well, which I was so nice to hear, because I'm naturally logical. I didn't work at it. I just am that way. And I do work at it, but originally I wasn't naturally this way. I just noticed that I figured stuff out that everyone else missed. And I was like, how's that possible? I didn't think I was that smart. This is before I discovered like you said, the ways in which I am smart.
I felt similarly, like when I was studying polyvagal theory with Deb Dana in a therapeutic sense, just because I wanted to know that I knew that I had read all the books, and I just wanted to make sure I knew all the information. And I came into a room with 60 trauma therapists who, first of all, were all very shut down and in dorsal. And
of course, right?
I come in there like a golden retriever being like, I'm so excited. Like, this is the most revolutionary, transformative idea. Funny. Like, how are we not like so excited? This is great news. This means that we can depathologize everything. And exactly. It was a moment where I was like, I am a strange bird.
Well, that's when you're dyslexic and you're creative like you are, we are very different than most people.
Yeah.
And that's something that's taken me years of research to figure out, is that I'm not wired like most people. And that's a reality. And, even my interests, and I'm such a nerd, and I get such pleasure from discovering answers to things that I can actually read technical books, and it's fun. It's like a fun adventure. And I don't know if you're familiar with Chris Kresser. Do you know who he is?
No, but I'm going to write that down.
Okay, he's a good resource of health information online.
Is and it in one of C? Chris with a C?
Yes, and but a K for the last name.
Okay.
Kresser. So one of the things that Chris said in one of his books that I absolutely loved is he says, when I get into a subject, I often go on a nerd safari. Which means that he gets so engrossed that he, 3 hours just goes by like that. Kind of, looks up blinking from the material, realizing that the time had gone by already, and, wished he had another 2 hours, that kind of thing. So that's something I do often, is I go on nerd safaris. And I went on a massive safari for polyvagal.
Recently, I've been having like crazy nerd safaris around polyvagal on airplanes. Like,
there you go.
You know how some people cry on airplanes? I like have moments where I'm like, oh, I understand this in a new way. So
yeah, you have that aha moment where you make another connection, right?
I remember I was on an airplane and I was reading, I think it was his first book, the blue one, that's a little bit more technical. And it was the first time I think I really realized, because one of the questions deep down in myself was like, why, if this system really is benevolent, it's really meant to protect us, why would the shutdown response, the freeze response, be so cruel to humans? Like, it's really cruel in so many ways. Like, it's really tough on people, and it diminishes their lives. And when I read that, it's reptiles can hold their breath for 20 minutes.
That's right.
So the oxygen deprivation is not as cruel to them. If a reptile or a fish freezes, they're fine afterwards. They can
they're totally
zip away.
fine.
But because we're so oxygen, our brains are so oxygen dependent, that it's like we can last about as long as we can with our head underwater, which is like a minute.
Well, it depends on the person, but yeah, you can,
For me, it's like 30 seconds.
5 minutes max if you train, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So that makes trauma more that kind of trauma more understandable, because it's like you're just oxygen deprived. Your body is trying to get, it's like when you're little and your finger is blue because you put a little rubber band around it. It's like
or your foot's falling asleep, right? And
Yeah.
you're hopping around the room because it doesn't work, right?
And
You're
then I
like,
was like, and then the process of getting out of a dorsal state is very similar. You're supposed to wiggle your toes. You're supposed to be gentle. You're supposed
Thaw.
to move, but not too much. And I'm like, it's just like when your foot falls asleep, because it's oxygen
right.
deprivation. It's the same thing.
Well, the other thing to clarify why this happens is that evolution is in process. So that it took me years to understand this, even before I discovered polyvagal, which is most critters are in the process of evolution as we speak, and we are especially that way.
Oof.
Where, like, if you're a shark, there's no evolution going on. You are done. You are maximized your evolutionary advantage. There's a few, I can't remember, maybe the duck-billed platypus too, but there are certain critters that are optimized for their environment, and there's no more to do. But most critters don't have that. So we have, like, women, for example, the female pelvis is not optimized for birth because we traded off birth safety for uprightness. That's what evolution decided was better. So uprightness was advantageous enough that the birth difficulties were worth the risk. So that's probably no different than what we have in terms of evolution, in terms of trauma when we're shut down.
Yeah.
And not to mention that I don't know if this is true, but I am assuming that one of the problems is that because we don't have tribes anymore, I think that we get traumatized more easily than we used to. So because if you have
lack of social connection, obviously.
Right. Co-regulation, if it's really vibrant where you are, where you're living and the people around you, it means that if you become overwhelmed, the resources for kind of reconnecting you are really good. Because everyone has a serious sort of investment in everyone else in a tribe that's less than 100 people, which is what, for the first, 700 million years of our existence, or more than that, billion years before we did agriculture, that's how we all lived. I'm sure it had its negatives too, but the thing that was good is that every single member was unbelievably valuable because there wasn't very many people in the world. So you wouldn't have to worry about you being disposable, because no one was disposable. So now we're disposable because there's so many people, and we're not bonded the way that we used to be, because everyone can just flit off on their own and buy food from the supermarket instead of working together to gather it or to hunt it. Right. So that's a problem.
Absolutely.
I mean, we're just, I'm not saying we should go back to being tribes in the woods, but we are missing out on that co-regulatory environment.
But everybody knows, like, people who've been in isolation, COVID,
yeah, exactly.
Or just like, I remember a period in my life when I went from living with my family in high school to living alone. That feeling of just like, there's nothing to regulate with.
No,
even
it's hard.
My crazy parents that you would never want to regulate within a million years.
Totally. You're like, still
they were better than nothing.
Yeah, that's true.
Because it's like having no one to regulate with you. You're kind of living alone with your feelings. And if you're not totally educated and know how to deal with your feelings, it's tough. It's really, co-regulation is the lubricant of the soul.
It certainly is. Well, like Porges says, that we are not designed to neurologically regulate ourselves. We're designed to co-regulate. And so therefore our nervous system regulation is something that's partly outsourced for every single human being. And he says you only be as regulated as the average of everyone you know. So co-regulation is a group project. It's not really such an individual project as it is a group thing.
Yep.
And he's like, it's like the World Wide Web. Our regulatory connections or not constitute a human connection that spans the globe. And so the more regulated you are, and the more you can regulate other people, and the more you spread regulation through the world. So there's another kind of another reason why we should all work on it diligently, because the effects aren't small, right? So now, no, I do remember that you were going to ask me about how this informed my practice.
Oh yeah,
Typical dyslexics. We went wandering through.
I know. We need to define neuromuscular therapy and what it is, just for people who don't know.
So neuromuscular therapy is a blanket kind of umbrella term for many different techniques that have to do with treating pain and injury in the skeletal muscular system. So I'm not a chiro, right? So some chiropractors practice neuromuscular therapy, and some of those techniques would include active release technique. That's a very common one people might know. Right. Trigger point therapy is what I learned first after I got my basic bodywork certification. And then over the years, I ran into many wonderful mentors who taught me some more advanced techniques. One of them is called neurokinetic therapy, and that's a way of understanding how the nervous system forms movement patterns and how those movement patterns can become dysfunctional, very similar to how the neuroception can become dysfunctional in the polyvagal theory. Except it's for movement and pain. And so there's ways in which I can interact with the body physically that helps the nervous system rewrite movement programs that aren't helpful. So those studies are very neuro heavy in their science. And so when I came across polyvagal, there was a lot of things that made sense immediately for that reason. But so, neuromuscular therapy is a blanket term for techniques that, really deal with, neurology and soft tissue mostly, movement, like fascia, muscles, tendons, ligaments, and even how they interact with each other through the sensors in the system. So because there's special sensors anyway that have to do with all of that, and not to get too nerdy here, but
no, that's so cool. Yeah. What's amazing to me is that someone who knows all of that about how deeply trigger points, the nervous system, and how to help people through that process, just the fact that knowing that polyvagal theory fits in there, like that it doesn't conflict with it.
Not at all. God, I'll tell you that this theory, first of all, it transformed my life to a level that I never thought I'd ever experience.
Will you share?
Yeah. So I don't have it anymore, but for most of my life, I had what's called complex PTSD.
Okay.
Which means that I missed, in addition to being overwhelmed as a child, I missed a lot of developmental interactive behavior with my parents because they were so depressed and narcissistic and all this stuff. And because both my parents had severe PTSD themselves, most likely developmental. My mom for sure, my dad most likely. And the result was I had terrible ADD, insomnia, depression, anxiety. Eventually I discovered that I had autoimmune disease as well, which is celiac. I had what's called brain autoimmunity. So when I was stressed out and ate the wrong things, which I did a lot because I didn't know any better, my brain would become inflamed and I would become unbelievably depressed and kind of, brain fog and instant fatigue and all kinds of stuff. So now I've always been a very curious person and a very open-minded person that wants to find answers. So I diligently sought answers for somewhere around 35 years. And the reason I know that these things didn't work is because I'm a very diligent person. So I would be told what to do about from different sources, whether it was a doctor or an alternative healthcare person. And I would diligently apply what I was told, and it would never work. And I spent unbelievable amounts of money, which I didn't really have because I didn't grow up rich. But I was determined. So I spent a lot of my income trying to get better, and it didn't work. Some things worked a little, and then it faded, and I had no idea why it worked or why it didn't. And when I finally discovered polyvagal theory, which was through the book, The Body Keeps a Score from Bas van der Kolk, right?
Of course, yeah.
I was absolutely floored. I was like, wait a minute. If this is real, maybe this is the answer. So I followed van der Kolk's advice in that book of, neurofeedback as a starting point. And then I did the Safe and Sound Protocol, which is Porges' sound therapy for reopening up safety pathways in the brain. I don't know if you know about that, but it's really helpful.
I do. I have so many questions for you. Yeah.
And actually, I offer that remotely now through my practice.
Oh, amazing.
So it's something we should talk about more. But anyway, yeah. And then I noticed massive shifts in my functionality. And, because I was always unsafe. That's the other thing, is I never felt safe. Now, there were times in my life I did. I'm not saying I never felt safe my whole life, but
sure,
the time
but it was
that
the flavor.
Yeah, that, it was the flavor of the whole system was, danger was everywhere, and I couldn't relax. I couldn't rest. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't enjoy things. And it got worse and worse as I got older, which it tends to. So when I started to apply polyvagal informed practices, I saw a real change, and it happened quickly. So in the first year of knowing polyvagal, I would say that I probably improved, I would say 70%. And then over the last 4 years, I would guess that if I saw any sort of clinician, they would decide that I do not have trauma at all anymore.
Wow. Because
of all the things that I've been able to do through that sort of informed map, I call it.
Yeah.
And of course it changed fundamentally how I approach my practice. And some of the ways that shows up, like, for example, Dr. Porges says the way in which a practitioner shows up socially with his clients or patients can be up to 50% of why someone gets well or not. Wow. Because that's co-regulation. I mean, 50 is a big number, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And he also explains that 80% of the disease in the US is autoimmune dysregulation. I mean, not autoimmune, but nervous system dysregulation, is probably the main cause of 80% of all disease in the US. So what happened is I got really serious with myself about showing up centered and ready to be there for people, right? Like, yeah. And I'd done that before, but never with this sort of seriousness. I was just like, there's no excuse. I have to show up centered and ready to go with people and like regulated, right? So now I do a practice in the morning, which I've been doing now for about 5 years, where I do anywhere from an hour to 2 hours of self-care, which includes breath work and cold exposure and meditation, or any sort of thing I might need to get myself, out of a state of dysregulation and not an unreadiness to be there for people. Yeah. It's made a tremendous difference in the results in my practice, I can tell. And through this new lens of polyvagal theory, I have been able to help chronic pain clients get out of pain. And this is after they went to Stanford, UCSF, and all kinds of other experts who had no idea what to do. This is and I look at myself like, who am I to do this? But the truth is, I am the one, because these doctors don't understand this stuff. And I'm sure they're brilliant at what they do, but they have this blind spot where they don't understand the sort of overall mechanism of how things develop. And it's tragic. People come out of their offices feeling worse.
I mean, I'm so happy to hear that. I'm so happy to hear you say that.
This is what I've really understood about polyvagal. It's the most human thing possible that you could possibly integrate into your life, because it's exactly how we're designed to be in the optimal way, is that we are designed to synchronize with other humans in a safe way so that we can create an environment of creativity and high intelligence in our own system, because you don't get it without that. You don't get your best self without safety. Mm-hmm. Like, you just don't, because Otherwise, you're stuck in primitive brain states, and you're going to be acting like either a wild, aggressive primate, that's fight and flight, or a lizard, unemotional lizard, which is either freeze or shut down. So if you want to be that kind of critter, fine, but it's not going to result in good things for your life. You're going to end up, having difficult relationships and difficult, financial problems and who knows what, because you can't regulate yourself, and you just attacking and defending like some sort of savage instead of some sort of civilized human. And to be human means to be kind, generous, and fair, right? That's what that's what a human does. A primate, it attacks and defends.
Right.
That's our political environment now, is that you have this sickening level of of fight flight mostly, and people thinking that they have to be safe by attacking and destroying their enemy. And it's like, no, that's not what you need to do. What you need to do is to step back and find your humanness and open your heart, right?
It makes me always think, how can I teach this to different kinds of people?
That's the golden question. It's exactly what I'm trying to figure out too, right?
Because it's so easy to be judgmental about somebody who's in fight or flight, who's acting like an asshole. Yep. But then when you understand this, you're like, and it's neurologically how your body just acts when you have neuroception, which is totally unconscious and isn't your fault. And
that's right.
So, yeah.
Well, think about it this way. The answer to dysregulation is co-regulation. So the way in which we can help those people that are not centered is to be centered. The way that we can help them is to not be polarized. So if someone comes at you with polarization, you need to respond with connection. That's the key.
Which is really tough to hold yourself if someone is being racist, or sexist, or homophobic, and you're just holding a center and holding regulation and talking to them respectfully.
That's right.
That takes a very special person.
It does. But you think about, if that's, what is our goal, right? What is each person's goal? And my goal is to be the best possible human I can be. Right. That's my goal. And what I know, especially after I've gone a deep sort of safaris into polyvagal, there's other scientists that agree with Porges, right? It's not just him talking about this.
Yeah.
Is that's what the higher level is ventral vagal in the face of someone not being in that place. I'm sorry, ventral vagal, I'm getting technical. So to be in a regulated, safe state is the antidote to other people not being there. Because that's what a parent does for a child. That's the original model of regulation, is the mother regulating a child. Right. And that's the first 6 years of life. And then the father steps in and does a lot of that too. But in the first 6 years, technically speaking, the mother's job is to teach the child how to regulate when they feel threatened. And there's this kind of dance that goes on where the child, you can see children do this. They kind of try to get a little further away from mom, right? And then they get all nervous and they come back again and they want to, okay, is mom still here? Yeah, she's still here. I'm all right. Oh, good. So let's go a little further this time.
And regulate.
And then, I can't do it anymore. I come back. But each time you get a little further out.
Yeah.
And so that's what we need to do for each other. And, basically what polyvagal teaches us is that when someone else is dysregulated, what they're actually saying is they need help.
Yeah.
And they don't know they're saying that. But if you are a human, you'll know it. Just like a mother would know that a child is super, how children get all spazzed out. They do everything that we adults do, except it's acceptable because they're growing up. But if a child gets really like, they just can't handle their feelings. And what do? You hug them.
Right.
You contain them. And you say, honey, why don't we just breathe? Okay.
You're safe.
Right. You're safe. Mom's here. You're fine. You're safe. I got you. And then what happens eventually, the child goes, and they kind of do that thing where they go through the cycles. And then eventually they do the breath, which indicates the vagal brake coming on, which is they go, and then they relax and smile. So that means that the human part of their nervous system has just come online.
Yep.
So, by the way, there's an excellent example of that in the Disney movie Inside Out. Just saying. But,
really? The vagal?
Yeah. If you look at the end of the movie, when the child finally tells the parents how she feels, and they realize that she was suffering from thinking she couldn't show her feelings, they hug her, and she goes, she almost cries, and then, and she smiles and sinks into them because I was like, those guys did their homework, I'll tell you.
Yeah.
As they always do. But anyway, so so what Polyvagals allowed me to do is to read my client's state and help navigate it into a place of safety as often as possible. Now, of course, I don't always succeed. Some days I'm not as good as others.
Of course.
Some people are harder to help than others, but I have noticed a massive shift in people's sense of safety in my office, which of course they probably don't even know what I'm up to.
Yeah.
But nor do they need to. Like, it's like, I'm just doing my job. And even with my work, now I recognize that if someone is upset or triggered for any reason, it doesn't need to be justified. Like, it's not like I need to ask them, okay, let's prove that this was okay, that you got upset, that you tensed up. It's like, who cares? It's their neuroception. To them, it's real. Right. That's all that matters. And all we have to figure out, and sometimes it's hard, is what does their nervous system want? What is neuroception requesting for safety? Mm-hmm. And, sometimes it's nonverbal, usually is. Certain kind of touch, a break from sensation. Like I had a client at the end of the session, she was really overloaded for some reason, and she had vertigo. So what I did is I had her go face down on the table. I put on the electrostim for 15 minutes. And I had her breathe into her chest. And by the time she got up, 15 minutes later, it's a good time frame, by the way, for the nervous system to reset. She didn't have vertigo anymore.
Wow.
So that was stress induced for some reason that I'm not too sure about, but that was the correction. Yeah. And she does feel safe with me. She's known me a long time, so that helped too. But that was, so it's kind of the way I see polyvagal theory, and the way I see my chart is the map. And your state awareness is your position on the map.
Right.
And then you get to ask yourself, is this response functional?
Yeah.
Adaptive, right? And if it's not, then you want to figure out ways to like breathe or move or whatever to do to change your state, or sometimes just to stop. Right. Often what people need to do is stop and breathe and just chill. Because we're always on the go in our culture. There's never a moment to reflect. It's like, I got to keep pushing forward, otherwise I'll, kind of thing that people do.
I mean, I have to convince performers that it's okay to just be on stage and be silent. And actually being silent on stage is all of a sudden, if you're quiet, if you just stand on stage and look into the audience, regulate with them warmly and say nothing, they all go,
oh, it's a power move, actually. That's what people don't realize. It is silence is a power move. Not to say that it's evil or anything. I'm just saying that it's
regulated silence. When you're like, I'm safe. I'm the mama of this stage. And you are my babies. And you can regulate. I'm the tuning fork to you tonight.
That's right.
And you came and paid lots of money for a ticket so you could regulate with me.
That's right.
Yeah, you don't know that's why you bought the ticket, but I know that's why you bought the ticket.
That's exactly right. And not to mention that storytelling, one of the functions of storytelling is to model regulation. So that's what stories originally do, is they pass on behavioral wisdom. So that when you're listening to a story, what it does, it's like a meta of life, right? So it's a meta version of life. It's often idealized. or condensed, right? In other words, this would all happen over 3 years, but it's only going to be a play that lasts 2 hours. And what you're doing is you're modeling what would be ideal for you to do, or not ideal, because it can be a lesson of what not to do, in a situation where you are challenged with something difficult. So that's what many stories do, is they, Shakespeare does that a lot too. It shows you, what would happen if, what would be the best thing to do in this situation, or what would be the worst thing to do.
Right.
And he's going to show you that explicitly. Like,
and we're going to learn before we make that mistake.
That's right. That's the point. And that's actually the point of almost all literature, from my understanding, at least on one level of analysis, is literature's goal is to transfer wisdom of behavior to people proactively, so that they don't have to make those horrible decisions on their own. And same with the Bible. That's the same reason that was written too, as far as I understand, is that it was a meta example of behaviors that we're trying to teach the young generation, so they don't have to make the same horrible mistakes we did, sort of thing.
And I'm sure Dr. Huberman, the Huberman Lab. He just did a segment on play, and actually playing pretend, playing role playing is a way of actually exploring safely in the world before.
That's correct.
Or even actual roles.
The play is also a way in which to solve trauma. So, like Peter Levine has a really good example of this in one of his books, where he was observing, or someone was, I think it was maybe a documentary of these 3 tiger cubs that almost get eaten by hyenas, I believe. And what they do is, after they escape, they engage in a play sequence where they each pretend to be the victim of an attack that either fights it off or escapes it, and then is victorious. And they take turns at that role. They're playing this out so that they can resolve in their nervous system that, we got away, didn't we? Yes, we got away. So let's practice that again. Let's make that an implicit sort of feeling in our system of escaping danger and being victorious in our survival.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely.
That's fascinating, isn't it?
Makes me want to cry a little bit, just like knowing that that's a part of our nervous system.
That's hardwired in a sense. I mean, that's what, and that's actually what Vanderkirk says that I really appreciate. He says, any experience that's stuck in your body is there because it hasn't been lived out in the way that your nervous system needs it to. So like our nervous system basically is a story system. It's a narration. We're narratives are how we make sense of the world. So if you have an experience that ended poorly, it's like reading a story that instead of happily ever after, they lived miserably ever after, right? That's this fairy tale, right? And so if you want to resolve that, you need to recreate the situation somehow in your nervous system and then change the ending. So now what you do is you say, okay, we all do this, by the way, it's called reenactment. So you have something that you've always struggled with. And I'll give you one of mine, which is I struggled with money for years. Being a creative person and not having good role models, I had terrible struggles with money. And I had all these phobias about dealing with it. And I was lucky enough to find a really good business coach who is also a financial expert. And it took about 5 years of meeting every single week and looking at the money together. And basically what he did is he co-regulated me around money.
Wow.
And it was magical because we would look at the numbers and I would interpret it. This is very polyvagal again. I would interpret it as a disaster. And I'd get depressed instantly. I'm like, oh my God, I'd go through all these emotions. And then he would, being a very calm centered guy, he was actually very naturally co-regulating, which
oh my God,
was a gift. Right. And he's like, I don't see it that way. And then he'd tell me what he saw. And I'd look at it and go, wow, you see that? And so over time, I was able to shift my perception, my response system to see what he saw. And so now I can handle my money like someone who knows what they're doing. So
and
it took
calmly with curiosity and calmness.
And I don't have those reactions. I don't panic anymore. I'll have now and then a little flavor of it, like, because, it never goes away, where you look
Yeah.
at it and you're like, there's a little blurb of,
Of
oh shit,
course.
instead. But then I'm like, okay, wait a minute, I'm good. I know how to do this.
Right.
But it took years of coaching, co-regulation,
Yeah.
for me to break that habit of seeing money as, some sort of dragon, basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
Well, before I let you go, I want to throw a, an idea at you around polyvagal theory because it's something that's been on my mind and it
sure.
relates to the storytelling element. And I have been feeling and thinking and reading, and it seems to me that polyvagal theory is incomplete in that there's a nervous system state that's missing.
Oh, I agree.
Which I've been calling, because I'm a performer and my whole life has been about, my degree is in playing pretend, and I'm a professional musician. So I know that the state you're in when you're either concentrating on something you really love or you're play acting, it's not the safe and social state, because the safe and social state contains the safe and social state, but it's different. And when you do brain scans of people playing music and you do brain scans of people playing pretend, it's very different than just normal everyday life. So my thinking is, my reasoning for this is because of Ken Wilber's work. Do you know Ken Wilber? Integral theory. So, polyvagal theory works the same way. Like the sympathetic system transcended and included the dorsal system. The safe and social system transcended and included both of those two systems. And so I've been thinking that there's a play system, what I'm calling super play, of pretend, of musicality, advanced musicality. So not like a bird call, but like truly advanced play that transcends and includes the safe and social system, because most people can attest that when they are in super play, they don't feel the same stress as they feel when they're in their safe and social. I think little irritations. So, and I've been thinking about this a lot because I feel like a lot of artists were not raised in families that nurtured their safe and social system. So they bypass it and go into fantasy and play and Broadway, but then they have a really hard time with social interaction outside of super play. So it's almost like a pathological bypass of this safe and social regulatory system, but yet they have a crazy ability to be like a super pianist or a virtuoso or even a great actor. But in real life, they actually struggle a lot. And so, yeah, that's my new theory.
Sounds like Michael Jackson.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I totally get what you're saying. It's a good question. And one guess I have is that my first intuition is what you were saying is I think it's a form of play. But I think you're talking about flow state. Is that correct?
I am.
Or maybe, right?
Well, because flow state actually doesn't require you to be safe and social. For example, if I'm playing Lady Macbeth, playing Lady Macbeth, I'm going to be like very serious about getting you to kill everyone that I want you to kill, right?
Right. In other words, you can flow in a negative way, right? Not or negative emotions.
It's an advanced version of play where underneath it, I'm safe and social, but yet I'm playing around underneath, so if the super play is above safe and social on the ladder, then it would make sense, because you can't have super play without knowing that someone is safe. Because somebody who's not safe and social and they're acting, it's a very scary actor. Because they can't hold you if something goes wrong. They can't be like, oh, I was just, I was playing. I didn't mean to hurt you. You know what I'm saying?
I do. Let me give you my hit on that, because it's so funny that you say that polyvagal seems incomplete, because that's exactly what I came to as I created the chart. and I had to make some creative I took some creative license with the chart because things were not explicit, right? So I was like, okay, I'm going to put stuff in here that Porges kind of hints at, but he doesn't really say explicitly. And that's
Yeah.
why I have a transitional state, which is called um, negotiate and appease. Those are hybrid states between the social system and the fight flight. So now, but here's what
Yeah,
I
because that's at the border, right? It's like
yeah,
there's
it,
more happening there.
it's like you. But basically, what Porges said is that the social system is still dominant, but there's a touch of sympathetic fear, right?
Yes.
So you're because it makes you alert and like you're really paying attention because you're like, okay, I'm okay now, but I might not be if I don't really pay attention.
Right. But you're still
And yet,
solving it with your face,
yeah,
right? You're
you're
still,
and you're still trying to bring the other person into social, right? That's and like the appease is he says there's certain people that the superpower that they can be in social when no one else is, and they can actually stay there even if the other person never comes around. And he
mm,
says that this is very unusual. It's kind of a somewhat of a human superpower, but it is something that he has observed to be true in certain people. And he says,
yeah.
he goes, I'm not really good at this. That's so funny when he was explaining it. He goes, yeah, I've kind of
Yeah.
suck at this myself, but I know a lot of people are really, some people are very good at this, and it's
Yeah.
incredible. So I think that if you strengthen the social system enough in the right ways, it gives you this sort of superpower thing where you're able to become connected to the primitive states in a way that's very believable, but you don't let go, you don't lose touch with humanity. And I also think this is true of people that are really effective soldiers.
Hmm.
So soldiers that are able to turn on beast mode and actually kill, right? But then they never lose their humanity. So they never kill more than necessary. They're in total control of themselves in terms of humanity, but they're able to access these primitive circuits and unleash their power without, it's almost like a wizard of some kind, right? It's this wizardry where you can be a centered good human, but you can take the tools of the primitive into your hand and use them appropriately without losing that humanity. And I think that's true of what you're saying as well.
Right. Because it's like taking on, just like an actor takes on a role.
Yeah.
You're taking on a role as soldier for a time, and
Yeah,
it's a
you're being a murderer, but
it's
you're
a
not a
kind of
murderer.
play.
That
Yeah.
it right.
Which is crazy to think about. Which is
You're a safe killer, which is like that's hard to imagine, but I think it's very real because there are people that can do that. They go like certain soldiers, especially the special forces people that have such high level of training. I do believe that many of them are able to do that, and that's why they're so absolutely effective because it's not functional to be stuck in the fight flight or the shutdown for very long. But if you can access the energies of one of the other or both, and then pull yourself, keep yourself tethered firmly and social,
hmm.
then as soon as you're done being a beast, you come straight back to being fully human. And there's no pot, and that way there's no rape or murder or all that stuff that happens when people get
Are
stuck in those.
actually,
Yeah, they
yeah.
can't come out of it, so they just keep going. They just keep going. I'm a monster, and I'm just gonna, I don't think, I don't feel, I just act, and I'm gonna dominate, and I'm gonna get rid of the enemy, and that's where you
Right.
get kind of fanatical.
Well,
Um,
that's one of the reasons I even knew polyvagal was true. The work of Patti Rodenberg. She's like the voice trainer for Shakespeare actors.
yeah,
And she, before polyvagal theory, years before polyvagal theory was announced to the world, she had a system called the second circle, which she said there's first circle energy, second circle energy, and third circle energy. And actors go into those energies to play. Third circle energy is pushed energy, sympathetic energy. Second circle energy is safe and social. And then she says first circle energy is like inward
mm-hmm.
energy. And she has such an interesting way of talking about it, but that we go into these energies, and then we come out of them in terms of play.
That's brilliant.
It's so
But
brilliant.
I'm not surprised because I'm sure that many brilliant people over the years have found polyvagal in their work and just didn't have a name for it.
Yeah,
Right? I
she
mean,
just didn't have the science. And then when
that's
I
right.
heard the science, I was like, well, this is already here. It's just we have names for stuff actors have been doing for probably hundreds and thousands of years.
I'm sure it's true of many, like, acupuncturists and other people that have learned a different paradigm. By the way, not all of them get this, but I've met some that seem to understand it because the Eastern approaches are more favorable to this point of view.
Right.
I mean, because polyvagal basically proves that mind body medicine is real. That's one of the things that I love about
Oh,
it too, is that,
absolutely.
it's not, the theory hasn't been proven, but if the theory is correct, then it's a basis to mind body medicine that we've never had before in the Western canon of science, which is really nice. And not quite this clearly, at
Yeah.
least.
What's been really nice for me because I work in the arts and I coach people in the arts is that it doesn't matter if it proven yet
Who cares?
because it's does it work?
Yes.
Does it save your ass on stage? Does it make you fans? Do you
Yep.
love performing? Like, what are the metrics of success? Is it working or is it not? And being
Well, that's,
really real with yourself about what is working and what is not working.
I mean, I'm glad you said that because I'm in a profession where people come in with either injuries or chronic pain. And believe me, they don't give a damn if it's scientifically proven. If I can help them out of pain, they don't care what it is, as long
Yeah.
as it's not immoral. It's like,
Yeah.
go ahead, because I'll ask them, I can try this new thing. And they're like, I don't care. As long as it works, just do it. And they don't need that. What they need is they need their life back. So you're in the same
Right.
sort of position I'm in, which is no one is an academic looking over my shoulder telling me that I can't do that because it doesn't make sense academically,
Mm-hmm.
right? They're just people around me that want to be better, and I have these tools that I can try out on them. Now,
Mm-hmm.
I try them on myself first. I don't just experiment randomly on clients. But once I'm pretty sure something's good, I'll
Yeah.
bring it to the office and I'll say, individually, of course, I recommend we might try this. And some people are open, some people aren't, but most people that are in chronic pain are pretty open to it and to
Yep.
different approaches, including
That
like the
makes
sound therapy and all that. I
that
mean, they're
makes
like,
total sense.
you know, whatever, I'll just want to get better. So I think that's a driving force for those of us that don't really need an academic stamp on what we do. I don't care. It's like, if people get better in my office, that's my degree of, I mean, that's the
Right.
approval stamp from the authority, and the authority is the person in pain. That's the authority, not
Absolutely.
not some intellectual in their ivory tower who decides from above what they think is valid. It's like, who cares? So
Because polyvagal theory has been mostly applied and most fleshed out in the therapeutic world with people who have been trained in cognitive behavioral therapy,
yep,
um, or
psychotherapy.
or psychotherapy, it's very based in that world.
Mm-hmm.
And in my opinion, I can't tell you how many people come to me saying, my therapy isn't working. I
Mm-hmm.
need help. I
Same
hate
here.
singing and I don't know why. And I don't think I think something that's missing from the therapeutic world of therapy is that there's no, I think they're afraid to be urgent. And in pain, there's urgency, right?
There is.
It's like, I want to help you as fast as possible. And like, same thing with my clients. It's like, you need to get on stage. We need to have a career. Like, we need to make some money. We need to enjoy our
Yeah.
lives, and we need to do it soon.
Yeah, I don't
Whereas,
have 20 years, right?
and that's
Maybe
the
I,
attitude that has been the attitude in the therapeutic world is like, we're going to talk for about 5 years and then we'll see if you feel better about your mom.
oh,
And it's like,
no.
they're like, one reason I wanted to talk to you is because I loved what you were saying about like your own protocols for yourself and the fact that you were like, no, you actually have to work out and you have to do meditations and you need to take care of yourself. It's a you kept using the word practice,
Yeah,
and
you got to
you
practice.
need practices, and
I mean,
that's
there's
what's missing in my
exactly
opinion.
like, and it's so funny that we have the same, and I shouldn't be surprised because when I saw your material, I felt the same way. Like, she really gets this stuff. Is that the point here for me is to empower people. like the information is a little difficult to translate, which is what we're both working on. But the reason that I think we're both so passionate about it is that I want people to get this so they can live their life now, that they can break out of this limitation and this hopelessness and realize that, one, the way in which your nervous system is behaving isn't an error. It isn't something to feel ashamed of. It's nothing to blame yourself for. It's just your nervous system trying to keep you alive. And once you realize that, you can let go of all these ideas about what's wrong with you or why you're resisting or all these things that people think are wrong with them, and learn how to work with the system the way it was designed to be worked with. And then that's this sort of revolution happens in the person where they can stop judging themselves and other people so harshly and start living through kindness and openness and connection, and not feel ashamed that you need other people to be happy, which is another stupid thing that people are taught in this country. You should be fine on your own. What a bunch of crap. That's not true at all. No one's fine on their own. What a myth. And yet we soak it up and we're like, yeah, I got to be fine on my own. I got to be strong. It's like, yeah, you should be strong, but not in that way. Like you be strong in your relationships. You can be strong in your loyalty, and you can be strong in your love, not strong in your aloneness. Ugh, what a terrible thing to teach people. But there's thousands of those beliefs in our system left over from this overemphasis on individual sort of autonomy, which I believe in that, but not in the way it's structured is wrong. You're not autonomous until you're fully connected and bonded. Isn't that that's the irony of it all, is that you're not free until you're connected and committed to someone else, something else, a group, the wellness of others. Like, that's how you free yourself.
I love that.
And it's just nuts how we've all been stirred,
I love that.
Put in the wrong direction, and then we work our asses off at it and wonder why we're miserable. Well, it's because the directions were wrong. They were misguided. They meant well, but they were not correct. That's the truth. And it's not like someone did it on purpose to torture us. It's just that it was.
Neither does patriarchy or capitalism.
No.
But it's the system. It's the water we're swimming in.
That's right.
If we don't know any better, then
if you don't understand the structure and how it's designed, you can work against it and make yourself suffer unnecessarily. That's one of my takeaways from all this.
Yeah.
It's worth knowing how it works and how things go wrong and how they go right. So that way you can know what you're, more accurately what to do and not do. And even the fact that you can't do this with willpower, you have to do it with a certain sort of finesse and understanding, because willpower does not control the subconscious system. And, you can get away with it for a little while before it grabs you by the ankles and sucks you under when you're not looking. So that's, does that make sense?
Yeah. And also
it's somatic.
The reason that I just want to keep thinking of how to explain it better to people and not make their faces just go totally flat.
There they go.
Yeah. Is that by knowing the mechanics behind, like, how does the system work? Why? Because once you know it, then the shifting techniques are extremely oh yeah, duh. Of course it works this way because it has to work this way. Then you, as the practitioner of your own body and your own self-healing, you're making choices on how to shift in a creative way. Like you were saying, I think in one of your videos, you said you were listening to you were watching action films to get out of a state.
That's right. And it's a reaction to shutdown.
Right. So, I say my sister, when she was struggling with pregnancy issues, she was watching horror movies all the time because she was shut down and she wanted to get into, her body was trying to move out. And I said, Jen, watch them all you want.